Welcome to the Millionaire University podcast. I'm your host, Brien Gearin, with you today. And on this edition of the MU Pod, I'm joined by Sean O'Dowd. He is the founder of Scholastic Capital, a real estate firm specializing in buying great homes in great school districts and renting them out typically to high school parents and parents of families with kids in high school. Sean, welcome to the show, man. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So big into the real estate investing game, and I loved your, just the mission of Scholastic Capital because there's so many different ways you can do real estate investing, and we've talked to a lot of real estate investors on the show before, but this one really caught my attention because, like, dang it, it just makes so much sense. Like when it comes to, you know, investments that feel like they're a sure thing. So we're going to get into that. I've got a million questions I want to pepper you with, and I really want to make sure we share the breadth of what you do with our listeners today. But let's start with your origin story. So how did you get to where you are today? What was your pathway to Scholastic Capital? Give us shed some light on that for us.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm originally from the Chicago area, born in Chicago. I live in Chicago now, and I moved 22 times growing up. So
Wow.
we moved a ton, basically every single year. And my mom was a teacher. So with her being a teacher, we were in a new spot every year. She was teaching in a different school. It got to the point where, call it 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. It's like, hey, I'm in my 15th school district. With my mom being a teacher, kind of aware of what's going on in all these different school districts. And no matter where we live, like there's always one really good school district. Everybody knows about it. It's like the school in the area. It's like, like this is kind of a universal human thing of like there's always good school districts and people always care about it. Didn't really know what to do with that, but ended up went to school, started working in corporate. I was a consultant, and started learning more about how to, for lack of better words, like build a thesis and test a hypothesis, and learned how to start looking at data. I was like, oh, okay, you can look at census data. Like, what are the three most common reasons people move? Like, number one is for a job. Jobs could be anywhere. Number two, people moving to take care of an elderly relative, also could be anywhere. Number three, moving for the betterment of the kids, which in most cases means better school districts. So I was like, all right, there's something here, and started buying homes in good school districts with my money, and my wife's money that we had made working our jobs. And that just kind of kept compounding, and it just kept working to the point where, fast forward a couple of years, we now run a fund specifically focused on this.
Wow. Okay. So what line of work were you in before you struck out on your own?
So I was a consultant. I was working for a big consulting firm, and then I freelanced as a consultant for a couple of years as well.
Okay, gotcha. So, what was it that kind of convinced you that you wanted to go out and do this on your own and kind of be your own boss per se?
I honestly, it was a couple of different things. The biggest one was my first day in corporate, literally like day one, just graduating college. At the consulting firm, there was a partner who got up and was talking about like the coolest thing that had ever happened to him in his life. And it was President Obama at the time cited his work in the State of the Union. Obama didn't go like, "Oh, this guy Joe," his name wasn't Joe, we would say it was Joe, did this fantastic report, or didn't even cite the company's name. He just referenced a statistic. And the partner showed us on page like 800 of the footnotes. He's like, "Look, look, there's my name." And I was like, like being a footnote on page 800 in someone else's speech is not exactly what I want to say is the crowning achievement of my life. And
Yeah.
it was day one of my corporate career, and I was like, this is not going to be where I want to be in the long run.
Okay, makes too much sense. So, what was the spark in you, or I guess in you and your wife pairing together your finances, and had you always had an interest in real estate? Did you have had you dipped your toes in it kind of on the side prior? What was it about real estate that draw you to it?
I think it was really learned experience, just from the moving so much. Like I got really interested in it. It's like, hey, like every year we need to find a new place to live. Um, there's this fantastically interesting, unique market called the real estate market that's changing. It's different everywhere we go, and I was just interested in it. Like I would scroll Zillow for study breaks in college, so it felt like the right fit for me. And I think that's been a really important and impactful thing is like the business that I'm running is literally a combination of like the two most core elements to myself. Like I've moved a lot, got me really interested in real estate. My mom was a teacher. I had an interesting perspective on real estate because of that, and like that's literally my business today.
Wow. Okay. So tell us about the first property that you went in and bought. What was that experience like?
Um, it was, and this is going to sound really weird, but it was a lot easier and more straightforward than I thought it would be. Um, and the reason why was I think a big, for lack of better words, like a mistake that people make when they look at real estate is like real estate is so big. Like I could go buy a small multifamily, I could buy industrial, I could buy like class A, I could buy class C. There's so many different things out there. And when my wife and I were looking for real estate, we got very, very, very specific of like, we are looking for exactly this type of house in one of these three zip codes, and it's going to be between this price, and that's it. That's what we're buying. But because it was very, very specific, we were able to spend, call it 6 months or so, getting really sharp on all of those homes that sold that fit that profile, and we got really good at it. And it got to the point, and that's not to say like we were doing anything amazing. It was just like, hey, we were looking at such a small subset. It was easy to memorize all the comps. So when the home that we actually bought came around and hit the market, it's like we looked at it, it was like we knew like this is it. This is the right home. It's underpriced. We can get it, and it's going to work out well for us as a rental.
So, speaking specifically about that place, but then the types of homes you currently have, what are the specs on this home? What's the size? What were the criteria that you ran through? The price, the size, all of that.
Yeah. So when we first got started, we were looking somewhere in the 400 to $500,000 range. We wanted at least three bedrooms. We wanted at least two bathrooms. Our tenants are families with high school kids. They typically want multiple bathrooms. They typically want a garage because it's cold in the Midwest where we buy homes, so they want to
Hmm.
keep the car out of the snow. And we wanted something that was just about rent ready, meaning like we could do no more than call it paint, and then the house would be ready to go and put it on the rental market. And that was the initial things that we were looking for. That first house was 440, three bed, three bath, 1,900 square feet. That was the last one. We were looking for something in the 1,000, 1,200 to 2,000 square foot range, and that was it. That was the sole criteria really in the beginning when we first started looking.
And when was that again? Time frame wise, that was
That
2018.
was 2018, I think.
Okay,
2018.
gotcha,
Yeah, I
gotcha.
think 2018.
All right. So you started with the first house,
Hmm.
about 440K, 1,900 square feet, good school district.
Hmm.
What was the process for you? I guess I'd be curious about how you guys did the financing. Was it just a
Hmm.
simple 30-year with 20% down, and then let's start there, and then I want to talk about how you got renters in there.
For sure. So on the financing side, we used, funny enough, Better Mortgage, the one that got all that flack from the CEO not being
Yeah.
super, yeah, when we fired everybody. We used Better Mortgage, and uh, probably could have predicted at the time that they were going to go under because the rate they gave us was just silly. So we did a 20% down 30-year mortgage with them. They ended up selling it to Wells. So our servicing's with Wells now. But yeah, that just to call it a traditional standard mortgage on the house.
Okay. And then what was the process like of, since this was the first time you ever owned a property that wasn't your own dwelling,
Mm-hmm.
what did you have to do to get tenants?
Yeah. So we knew we didn't want to do just one. We knew we wanted to build a portfolio. And at the time the thought process was we'll build a portfolio just for ourselves. So it was like we want to be hands-on and understand this business and learn it and do it ourselves. So it's like I'm gonna market this myself. My wife's gonna market this herself. Like we're gonna work on it together. So we did the publishing it on Zillow. We used a software called Hemlane that basically pushed the listing out to a dozen different rental sites, and we started getting leads coming in, and we would call them and schedule showings and call it and do it the old fashioned way. The big kind of question was our agents who represented us on the purchase transaction. They're phenomenal people. We really like them to this day. They thought that we were absolutely bonkers crazy to be buying this property because there's no rentals in these towns, these really good school districts, for various reasons there's no rentals. So they were like, you are going to rent this, you're going to rent it, but you're going to rent it at like $2,200 at best because that's the only comp we could find, and it's a year and a half old, and it's a much smaller house, and et cetera, et cetera. And we put it on the market at $3,500. So it was way higher than what our agents thought it would be when we first did it. But even at that higher price point, I think we had like 50, 60, 70 people reach out in the first 24 hours on the house. It's like,
Wow.
okay, like we're on to something here. Like there's interest in these homes in good school districts.
Wow, because you see that, and that's one of my curious questions is, so I live in a really good school district. We're very fortunate to be in the district we're in. The
Nice.
market here in Cincinnati is insane. We need a bigger
Hmm.
house, and it's it's been an adventure. But you don't see rentals in, like you said, you don't see rentals in good districts, and that's not. I don't mean that as a blanket statement, but it's
Hmm.
very uncommon,
Hmm.
and probably for good reason. Because I don't know. Tell me what your experience was when it came to being the rent or the finding renters in the area, and did you face problems from neighbors or from just the
Hmm.
general consensus in the area, or is it more like who cares? We got 60 people who want to rent from us.
It was more the latter of like, hey, like we've got a lot of tenants, and or a lot of people were interested in, and in a lot of cases, it's tenants who they make a very, very good income. But buying a home in a good school district typically means a jumbo mortgage, which means somebody needs 20% down. Like we see applicants almost on the daily who are making like really good incomes, but they don't have $200,000 saved up that they can go use as a down payment to buy a house. And these folks want to get into these school districts too. Like they want their kids to get a good education too. So on our side, we were like, hey, like if we can make these good school districts more accessible, like that's a win. Um, and it had some interesting byproducts as well. Like when we were initially first doing this, our thought process was like, we'll just sign everybody to a 1 year lease. Like that's the standard. Everybody does a 1 year lease. Like we'll do that too. What ended up happening is because there's not a lot of rentals in these districts, and because most of our tenants move in when their kids are about to start high school, our tenants know they're going to be there for a long time. They're not going to leave until high school's over. They're moving for the diploma. So the tenants started coming to us and saying like, hey, can we do a 3 year lease? Can we do a 4 year lease? Can we do a 5 year lease? Because they wanted to lock the place in because they have no intention of leaving the district. But if they did a 1 year lease and then for whatever reason they couldn't renew, there's no other homes in the area that they could move to, and their kids would have to change high
Mm,
schools. So it was a really kind of interesting byproduct that we were not expecting at all.
wow. Okay, I hadn't thought about that. So does that mean that and I think you said you have about 21 properties in your portfolio right now. Does that
Mhm.
mean that all or the majority of your properties are on a 2 to 5 year lease?
It is. Our average lease right now is 28 months at initiation, so 2 years, 4 months.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. And all right, so you got your first property,
Hmm.
you got tenants in there. It sounded like you had plenty of options of people willing to pay.
Hmm.
Um, did it go off without a hitch once you got tenants in there? Did you hire like a property manager? Was that you and your wife for the first house? What did that look like? I think a lot of people, correct me if I'm wrong,
Hmm.
are worried about real estate investing because they're like, well, now I'm turning into a landlord and they're going to be crappy tenants. Like, help us unpack that.
Yeah, so we were the property managers, and it was not that big of a lift. Like I am a big believer of like you should property manage in the very beginning to learn what you're doing, because if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be really hard to call it oversee a property manager. But what ended up working out well for us is when we went into this, part of our thinking was we want to pick the tenants that we want to work with. So in
Mhm.
our case, like our tenants have kids in high school. That typically means the parents of our tenants are typically like late 40s, early 50s. Like they're not throwing parties like you would see with like college rentals. Like a 50-year-old is just not throwing a
Right.
college rager. They tend to be much later in their career. They're more established. They're probably making a little bit higher income. They also tend to be relatively handy. Like I have plenty of folks, for example, who rent to kids in their like early 20s. Like they send in maintenance requests to change light bulbs because they don't know how to do it. Like our tenants, when we hear from them, it's like, hey, the furnace is like completely dead and is not turning on. we tend to not hear about the small stuff because it's a more savvy tenant, and that was a pretty intentional choice. I'm a really big believer of when you buy real estate, um, you are picking who your tenant is based off what you buy. And most people tend to look at just the property itself and they forget about the tenant element to it. Like if you buy, call it insert blank real estate, like I can tell you, you can tell yourself like who that tenant's going to be, and you can understand what your management burden is going to look like based off of what you're buying.
Yeah, and I think probably a lot of your population, your tenant population probably owned a home previously. Like they've known how to take care of things in a home that, falling short of something's massively broken, right?
Yep,
Is that
exactly.
something you write into your contracts where it's like we're not responsible for basic maintenance, or like do you need to be careful about how that's worded or perceived so that way like maybe you get a new tenant but then like they are calling you about broken light bulb or changing a light bulb. Like how do you prevent that so you maintain your sanity while also being a landlord?
Yeah, so there's two different ways we've gone about it. The first one is our leases give the tenants discretion to make changes to the place. So most of our tenants, for example, have repainted the home at their expense. They're like, hey, I'm going to be here 5 years. I want this to be mine. I really love the color green. I want to make the living room green. Great, go for it. Like you can do that. It's your place. So that has been a, call it, a big driver of making things easier, because if the tenant's like, hey, I really hate this light fixture because the light bulb keeps burning out, like great, they can change it if they want to. And we've seen a lot of tenants modify the homes like fairly extensively. The second element to it is we do have a term in our lease, and it depends on the state because there's different jurisdictions and rules. But we do have a term in our lease that's basically says if something is under $300, and we send out a technician and they charge less than 300 for that trip, like we can bill it back to you at cost. So for example, we had one tenant who couldn't figure out how to turn on the dishwasher. Like she couldn't figure out what button it was and decided she wanted to send in a maintenance request instead of Googling it. Um, Dishwasher repairman went out and showed her what button it was. It was like a $260 maintenance request for a $200 trip charge, I think, and then $60 for his time for the 10 minutes to show
Hmm.
her. Um, we sent her the bill. She paid it, and then we never heard from that tenant again unless it was like a, hey, the roof is leaking or something like that, which is not actually
Right.
what happened, but like it's an important kind of element to have in there.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so as you started growing your portfolio, did you start growing it like in the same neighborhood, the same district? How did you? Let's start talking about how you started expanding and going from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 10 to 20.
Hmm. For sure. So it was like after the first one was going, and it was probably 6 to 12 months in, we're like, well, this is really working. We started looking for the next one, and then funny enough, we actually found two at just about the same time period that we liked them both, and they were it was a different town. It's about 10 minutes away from the first house. And we basically tapped every penny we had because we liked both of them. We thought they both were very good, but we didn't really have the money at the time for two of them. So we kind of put every dollar we had into it. And it was the exact same thing where we bought them, we got them rented immediately at strong prices compared to what the agents thought. And the operations were relatively smooth. And at that point, it's like, okay, like we've got something here now. This is now, it wasn't a fluke the first time around. We've now got repeatable examples. Let's start thinking about what next looks like. And for me, that was like, okay, we need to turn this into a fund model. And a lot of reasons on why you should or shouldn't create a fund, but for us, it was what made the most sense at the time. And that was really the process. So standing up the fund was about an 18-month period. Once we were done with that, we got a significant amount of capital in from investors, and then that's what allowed us to purchase the next batch of homes. And then we're gearing up for our next round of purchases this upcoming summer, because we buy these homes in the summer because that's when our tenant base is moving. So we buy May, June, rent July, August. So we're gearing up to buy probably an incremental 50 homes this summer.
Okay, so let's dive into the fund model. So I have a general idea of how that works, but let's talk all the nitty gritty of what that is. For those who might not know, let's talk about what it is, how it works, why you went that direction, why it took 18 months to get going, and give me all the dirt on that.
Yeah, for sure. So we're a true private equity fund now. We are registered and regulated by the SEC. There is a whole host of legal implications that come out from there. You need a very expensive specialized lawyer. You need two different accounting firms that have different specific purposes. You need compliance. You need IT. Like there's a whole host of stuff that you have to get set up. Um, it's not easy to do, and that's why it took so long. Because you need to really get your ducks in a row with a lot of people. Um, it's unlike a syndication, in that a syndication is actually relatively straightforward to put together because it's for one specific property. Investor knows like I am giving this syndication money to go buy 123 Main Street. With a fund, it's a discretionary pool where investors are basically wiring me money and saying, hey, go out and buy something with it. But they don't know what I'm going to buy before they've wired me the money. So there's a lot of incremental legal guardrails as a result. So standing all that up took about 18 months. The reason why it made sense to do was a couple. The first is because these homes are in really good school districts, they sell very, very quickly. So we couldn't actually go down the syndication path because by the time we got syndication documents together, the home would actually be sold. So we needed that discretionary pool so we could move quickly to buy homes. The other piece to it is this is a business where the returns get better the more homes that you have. Part of that is operational. Part of that is for lack of better words, a roll-up strategy. The more homes you have, you can sell them in a package to a larger player. So it made sense to do so in a fund model, so we can kind of build that larger and larger package.
Okay, you mentioned a syndication. What's that?
A syndication, that's the kind of the most common version of uh, call it buying real estate with investor capital, where it's a one-off purchase where at its core, at its most basic level, is it's an LLC where there's somebody who is running that deal, a syndicator, who says like, hey, I am going to raise money from a bunch of investors. They're going to invest in the LLC, and then this LLC is going to go buy a business and then, or excuse me, buy some real estate, and then everybody's going to make money on the back end. It's a very common model. It's a very popular model. There are some highly sophisticated players who solely do that for a variety of reasons. And then there's called the discretion. There's the true fund model where it's like a more of a discretionary pool to go out and buy real estate. If we could, like I would prefer the syndication model. It's a lot simpler. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot cheaper. But just with the nature of what we have to buy, we have to go down the fund path.
Because of the nature of what you buy being that they're better, nicer, bigger homes in good areas, or
That they're real estate that sells quickly. So like one of our homes will hit the real estate market at 9 a.m. and then it'll be under contract at noon. So it's a really quick turnaround. And in a syndication, you need to create what's called offering documents. So you say, hey, investor, here's a really nice PowerPoint about how I'm asking for $100,000 from you, and I'm going to go buy this apartment building. You can do that in apartment buildings because they don't sell so quickly. For
right,
houses, like we can't do that. We need the investors to basically have given us money up front, because otherwise, like we won't be able to buy those homes.
right. And does this allow you to, let's say there's a $500,000 house for sale in the nice neighborhood in Chicago with the great school district. You guys see it. This is a target. We're going to go get it. Is that where now you can go to the real estate agent the minute the listing shows and be like, here's 500K. This is ours.
Exactly. Exactly right. It's a huge competitive advantage for us because uh, we won 55.1% of our offers last summer. The reason why we won so many, despite it being a really competitive real estate market, is we can move very quickly.
Right.
If the home hits the market, we again our buy box. We talked about some of our specific criteria we had earlier. There's now 17 things on that list. So when a home hits the real estate market, we know inside of a minute if it hits those 17. We can then do manual underwriting to make sure that we like the deal. That takes another, call it incremental 30 minutes. We can get them an offer about 5 minutes after that. So like we get the offer to the agent in the first hour, all cash offer, and it's like, hey, we're an investment fund. We're not going to nickel and dime you on the inspection because we're worried about the light bulb being out. Like we know what's a big deal versus not. And oh, by the way, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, We don't have a buyer's agent, so you can keep all of the commission yourself. You don't have to share with the buyer's agent. It becomes a really easy offer to accept because it's fast, it's what they want, it's cash, and the agent's incentivized to work with us.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, that makes it easy. So how did you go about finding investors for the fund? Or is that if we're not in the world, we don't know that that's something that's actually fairly easy to do, or is it the complete opposite?
It's uh, it's the complete opposite, but it's also
Okay.
totally just a totally different, like unique world out there. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Uh, for us, the vast majority of it has been inbound, and then it's been referral from existing investors. Some people do Facebook ads. Some people do placement agents, meaning you hire somebody to go find the money for you, and then they take a cut of it. Um, there's a whole kind of host of different things. For us, it's just been like, hey, I'm gonna talk about what we do publicly with people, with friends, and if the idea sounds interesting, people are like, oh yeah, like I'd like to learn more. Um, then great, and then we'll work with them if it makes sense. We'll work together. If it doesn't make sense, then we'll say so. And then if we do well, what we found is they tend to tell multiple friends, and then it just kind of expands out and pulls out from there. Um, the hard part about this is our minimum investment is $250,000. So it's a significant amount of money, and we'll call it like more aggressive sales tactics tend to not work in this industry. Also, we're going to be working with these people for a long time. Like I don't want to like use car salesman somebody into sending us a big check and it's not going to work anyways. Like I'd rather build a slow long-term relationship on trust, and then as we perform like the way that we say we would, they tell friends and it expands out from there.
Okay. And then is it like where you invest at a certain level and you're entitled to a certain percentage, and then it's the revenue? Is it just revenue splits, revenue share? How does that work for the return on investment for the investors?
Yep, for sure. So investors get return in a couple different ways. When they invest in the fund, they get their percent allocation of the profit. So, for example, when maybe like the easiest way to think about it is like it's kind of like a non-traded REIT. So investors are really buying shares in the fund. Let's say they own 10% of the shares. Every month, this is what one of the accounting firms is for. Every month, one of the accounting firms looks at it. It has to be the accounting firm, so it's third party. They look at it and they go, hey, rent collected was $1 million, property taxes and insurance and everything was $500,000. There's $500,000 of profit left. This investor owns 10% of all the shares, so they get 10% of the $500,000. Here's their $500,000, and they do that work every single month for us. That's a big part of it. The other parts of it is we pass the depreciation back through to the investors, so all the homes have depreciation. For most of our investors, everyone's tax situation is different, but for most of our investors, it means their distributions are tax free, which is kind of a nice element and a big part of why investors like investing in funds. And then the last piece to it is they actually own their equity as well. So they get the distributions, like everybody would get their cash flow from rent, but they still own the equity. So, for example, if we were to sell all of the homes later on, they get their call it 10% of the equity as well.
Okay, interesting. And then what was it like going from buying that first house, and then how many years was it between buying your first one and going to the fund model?
It was about 3 years from the point of buying the first home to when we were called set up with the fund.
Okay. So I'm interested in the operations of your business. So you're a private equity company, right? That's essentially
Hmm.
what you are.
Yep.
And how does it run? So you're the CEO. Is your wife on board working with you, or do you have a partner in the business? Do you guys have what's your structure look like for actually running the fund?
For sure. So my wife still works her full-time job, so she's no longer involved in the day-to-day of the real estate. So I run the fund, and then I have a partner in the business. He is a an attorney, which is extremely helpful and extremely
That's
useful
nice.
because he does all of the legal stuff, which is great. And then we have 4 full-time employees who all handle different elements of it. So we've got a controller and an accountant, and then we've got an asset manager who oversees the houses, and then an ops manager who does kind of a little bit of everything, specifically data, which we can talk on in a second. And then we've got our advisory board, which is knowledgeable folks that are bringing some specific elements to it. So we've got some big Midwest multifamily players who are very knowledgeable about our markets, and then we've got some single family experts, a gentleman who runs a fund in Louisville, and then a gentleman from Blackstone, and then a gentleman from Tricon, which is one of the largest owners of single family homes in the country. So they basically provide guidance that helps flow into the day to day, which is really data. Like at its core, this is a big data business. Um,
Yeah, let's talk
like
about that.
for sure. So like where real estate gets called for like the past 10, 15, 10 years, like people have made money in real estate because interest rates are low and prices have been going up. It's been a great deal. When real estate isn't on a rocket ship up like it has been, where people have succeeded is conservative leverage and fixed leverage, and then operations. And the operations is really where you can kind of make and break it. And for single family and for most real estate, that really comes down to data. So on our end, for example, we have an absolute ton of data on all of our homes, and we're constantly updating it and improving that data and using that data for our decision making. So for example, like we have a furnace that goes out on like 123 Main Street. Traditional process is like, okay, furnace is out, tenant calls into the property manager goes, crap, they call a furnace company. The furnace company is like, oh, I'll send somebody out tomorrow. The guy comes out tomorrow and he's like, oh, this thing is shot. We need to put a new one in. I'll call you back tomorrow. And then they call the property management company. The property management company is like, wait, I think it's a new furnace. Like, we don't want to replace it. And then they have to send the guy back out who looks at parts, and the whole thing takes like 3 weeks. And it's the number one driver of tenants leaving their lease is poor maintenance.
Hmm.
On our side, we have a ton of data to actually run that process. So 123 Main Street calls in, says, hey, the furnace is out. We go, okay, great. That's a Lennox 1234. It was installed March 2018. This particular model of the Lennoxes have had a big issue with the heat pumps. They typically crack 5 years in. We have a 90% confidence that it's a cracked heat pump, and what the issue is. We call the HVAC company and say, hey, we need you to go to 123 Main Street. By the way, bring a heat pump for this Lennox install. We get it done in one trip. We get it done way cheaper. We don't have to deal with the HVAC company trying to ask for like, hey, you got to replace the whole thing when we know we don't have to. And the HVAC companies love us because they can squeeze us in as an extra trip basically any day, because they know they're going to be in and out. They don't have to be like, oh, it's going
Right.
to be a 4-hour thing. They're going to be in and out in 20 minutes. So like things like that is where this business really gets better and better and better. But it's really difficult to do, because if you don't have that information up front, it's very hard to retroactively go back and start building it. Paint is another really big one. Like, very common thing that happens. Somebody uses a blender without the top on. There's pasta sauce or whatever all over the kitchen. It's like, okay, great, you need to repaint the kitchen. If you don't know the color of the paint that's on the walls and all of the house, you're going to have the kitchen, it's going to look weird because it's going to be a different shade of paint. If you know the paint codes on all the rooms and all the houses, great. You order the Sherwin-Williams, it's showing up the next day, it's on the wall the day after that. Everything looks fine, good, done, easy. You don't have that information, like it's going to end up being a week and a half process, and it's going to look weird. It's going to hurt your value. It's going to hurt your rent on the next time you do it. So like all of these little data things have to be built into the operations to make sure that you're taking care of the homes appropriately.
How do you manage all that data? Because I think that for so many businesses, regardless of industry, collecting, managing, and then utilizing the data is one of the hardest things to do. Do you have a guy that does that? Do you guys use spreadsheets? Do you have custom software? What does that look like?
It's so I'm the guy who does that for now. At some point, we're going to hire like a VP of data who's solely focused on this. We use a couple of different things. We do use spreadsheets in some cases. We also use a software called Retool as well. That's like a database with a front end on top of it. Um, the challenge with it is just making sure that it's all accurate and right and flowing to and from the right places. Um, Eventually we're probably going to need to build a full-on a full-on database that's got everything, but at least for now it's Retool and spreadsheets.
Awesome. Okay. So, and you guys, I mean, you guys are crushing it. You got 21 properties right now. I think you said are you planning to buy another, how many this
50,
summer? 50.
50.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're going to like double your portfolio pretty darn quick, more than double it. That's
That
awesome.
that's the hope. I mean, the goal is I had it up earlier. The goal is we want to be around 70 or 80 million by end of this year, and then most likely cross 100 to 150 the year after that. So I guess next year.
Wow. And is that top line numbers?
And that's AUM
Or
for assets
AUM.
under management.
Assets under management. Okay, gotcha, gotcha. Wow. Okay, so as you grow, what are the things within your business that you need to either adjust, or are you guys at the capacity right now where you can be like, "Hey, we can take on this 50 and like we're ready to roll," or is this going to be like a major growth spurt where there's a lot that needs to be added to the business?
We can take on this 50 because we stopped buying in August of last year. So we're 5, 6 months or so into our like update the processes and systems and tracking. So we're ready for this upcoming 50, but then we're going to need to redo it again next year. The biggest part of it right now is uh, hiring, making sure we got the right people and the right seats on the team, and then making sure that the team is well equipped to do what they need to do for their work. Um, so, for example, like everybody on the team has no more than 3 metrics that they're responsible for, and they know what their metrics are. They know how to influence those metrics, what makes them go up, what makes them go down, and they know how to do it. We run a system called EOS as like a business management system. Like every morning at 9 a.m., a scorecard is sent to our Slack channel. We know what metrics are red, yellow, and green. If someone's got a red metric, it's like, all right, I got to go fix it. I know how to do that. Everything is built on Asana as like our task management system. It's like, hey, log in. These are the 17 things I need to get done today. Like, just work your way through them as we go through. That'll work for the next 50. After that, we're gonna need to hire a bunch more. So we're gonna need to build out new metrics for those new hires. We're gonna need to build out new processes or add them into existing processes. So it's a whole kind of incremental stuff we're gonna have to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you're looking back when you first started this, and I want to kind of bring it back to where if somebody who is either in real estate investing right now, maybe a little bit, maybe they got their foot in the door, or they're considering this as possibly their opportunity to go out and do their own thing and leave the 9 to 5, or just get into real estate investing in general. Do you think that your model is repeatable for a lot of people, or does it have to be very specific to where for you, you're buying homes in high price districts? That sounds like it lended itself to the fund model better. Or do you think it makes more sense to what I guess I'm asking, what would be your advice for somebody who's just getting into it or is going to be getting into this when it comes to what the plan should be for growth from just one property to the next?
For sure. I think what has really been the like biggest accelerant and driver for us is we are very, very specific. Like real estate's a multi-trillion dollar industry, and we are looking at like the tiniest sliver of the tiniest sliver of the world. And I can say with confidence, like we are the best in the country at buying homes to good school districts. And that's not like a braggadocious statement. It's like we are just the only ones that are in this very, very specific niche. Like if you're looking for a 3 bed, 2 bath, 1,700 square foot house in a really good school district that's also supply constrained, we're the only ones playing that game, which allows us to get really experienced at this particular element, allows us to build relationships with agents who know what we're looking for and they can get to us with things. So my advice to somebody who's getting into real estate is like, whatever you think is like the thing that you're interested in, make it more specific, and then you make it more specific 4 or 5 more times until you get to the point where you can confidently say you are the only person who is specialized in that one tiny, tiny sliver of the world. And then that will allow you to grow so much faster because you will be the best in the world at that one very, very tiny specific thing.
And maybe not just the best, you'll be the only, right?
Hmm.
Like what's better than the best? The only.
The
I'm the
only.
only one who does this. We're the only ones who do this service or provide this type of home or, rent to this type of person in this type of place.
Hmm.
It's hard to beat that.
It's hard to beat that, and you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn so much of like, hey, like uh, for example, a common thing that people say in real estate is like, oh, I can't find any deals. I can't find deals. It's like, no, there are literally at any given point across the country, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 million properties for sale. There is something in there that makes sense to buy. The challenge is you're looking at all 3 to 6 million. You need to be looking at a world where it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of it. And if you become the expert on it, the deals are going to jump off the page at you because you're the expert on that tiny sliver.
Right. Makes too much sense. So it's almost like ultra niching into your specialty or what you want to be the only in,
Hmm.
essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love it. It makes too much sense. Well, man, we're getting up against time here. I know you're a busy man, so I gotta let you get going here. But this has been fantastic. If you had one piece of advice for somebody who's getting in, niching down, does
Hmm.
it matter what they're niching into? Is it like the world your oyster? Or are there specific niches that you would recommend that somebody look at?
I would think about niches through the lens of like supply and demand imbalances of like, hey, there's a lot of demand for tenants for this particular property type, and there is limited supply for whatever various reason that might be. One area that's very hot right now is industrial small bay in particular, which is basically like um, think of like a small warehouse in the neighborhood of like 1,000 to 5,000 square feet for like the local plumbing company where they can keep their stuff, they can drive their trucks inside, and there's probably a small office or cubicle or two for somebody to work in. It's a very, very hot piece of real estate right now. A big reason why is there's a lot of small businesses that need that, and most cities don't allow those to be built because they think they look ugly, they don't want them in their towns, whatever. That is really interesting supply demand imbalance dynamics. Like I would look for something like that with those supply demand imbalances that intersects with a very, very specific niche. So if it's like, hey, I'm going to be small bay industrial in the northern suburbs of Milwaukee with a focus on 1,000 to 2,000 for new home service companies, like that's pretty specific. You can be very, very good at that specific niche, and like that's an example of something that I would look into and try to become the expert on.
I was talking to someone. I think they labeled it as a luxury storage, where it could be
Mm,
you could either it's big enough to store, your boat for
mm.
the winter, or it's big enough to house a tiny local plumbing company. It's got internet connectivity, a desk or two, luxury storage. So that sounds like that's about the same realm. And I heard that's a hot space to be right now.
Hmm. Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. Well, Sean, man, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to make sure that anybody listening today can find you if they want to reach out, if they have questions, or if they want to check out Scholastic Capital. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm surprisingly like very active on Twitter. Surprisingly because I like never would have expected that. But I tend to just like tweet stream of conscious thoughts of like what we're seeing and doing on a day-to-day basis. And my DMs are open, so I've people reach out and have met some really really awesome people that way. So would love to meet you.
All right. Awesome. You heard it here first, folks. Reach out to Sean O'Dowd on X/Twitter. Sean, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks for having me.
All right. My pleasure.